I think we're ready to start the afternoon session. We're on Spanish time, so we're only an hour late, which I think is cool. Hopefully everyone's had a really good lunch. I know I have, and I'm going to try to stay, I'm sharing the session, I'm going to try to stay awake for this. But actually I think this is going to be really a lot of fun, because if the first session was about raising a whole load of issues for us to think through, the second session is in many ways starts to gear us towards, I think, something that we're really interested in, and that what Pelagios is trying to do, which is to gear us towards more practical solutions. So we're going to see a whole range of projects that have been funded by the Pelagios project via the Melon, because the two aspects of Pelagios, the latest round, Pelagios Commons, has been about community development and technological development. In many ways, they come together in this afternoon session, in that we were, as part of the technological section of the grant proposal, we had pitched to the Melon that we would select a few projects to give money out to. So we would become like the mediators for kind of linked open data development. And we're going to see the fruits of those that initial round of funding with 5 projects shortly. But first up, as not so much a hangover from the first session, because we couldn't find anywhere to put Gretchen, but really as a kind of a segue, a lead into the idea of a user community focus. Which is one of the main factors, I think, that we've been stressing really from the beginning of today. The Link Pass is all about community development, particularly users. And I get the impression from Gretchen that we're going to hear a slightly different kind of user than the one that perhaps Rob had suggested in the first talk. So perhaps less JSON and more about how researchers might be able to use linked data. So it's a great pleasure that I can introduce Gretchen Gueguen. Gueguen. I only asked her a minute ago and I've already forgotten how to pronounce her surname. Okay. From the Digital Public Library of America to talk about users. Thank you, Gretchen.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for having me. Okay, so hi, I am Gretchen. I am the Data Services Coordinator at the Digital Public Library of America. So that means that I oversee our metadata mapping and metadata quality control. And I work with our partner institutions all over the United States who contribute data to our aggregated data set. If you're unfamiliar with DPLA, it's very similar to Europeana, but for the United States. So, as Elton noted, this is going to be a little bit of a counterpoint to our keynote this morning. So, I would like to ask you to think of the unskilled users of linked data, not the developers. I agree that developers need to be able to use the data to make the stuff, but without a broad base of people to use it, I think our future viability is limited, and I was asked to talk about practicality and users, so that is what I'm going to do. So I'm actually not going to talk much about DPLA. I'm going to talk about a more broad topic. Hold on, sorry. So I spent a lot of time trying to think about how to approach this, and I'm a librarian professionally. I have a master's in library science. I'm often asked to talk about how DPLA uses linked data and what DPLA's plans for linked data are, but ironically, I'm rarely asked to talk about why we are using linked data or what good it is. I thought I would start by going back to my librarian roots. This is a picture from the library at the university where I got my degree. And I would look at user studies in the body of library research. So these are research studies that actually observe people and how they seek and how they use information. And these go back, many years to before we had online catalogs or online resources, and actually, watch people in libraries, or nowadays do studies with people using computer interfaces to find research. So I thought that I would start by articulating how people do research and what they need to be successful. So what do people do in libraries? And they probably don't do this. But I had to use that. So I thought I would start with a 2009 study, a little outdated at this point, but still really good, published by OCLC Research. If you're not a librarian, OCLC is a large corporation that provides library services and has a research division. So this study specifically was a meta-analysis of about 100 user studies. So analyzed the results of about 100 studies and kind of synthesize them into some major points. So I'm pretty familiar with this paper. I actually assign it to my students in their digital library course, so I thought I would use it. It's called The Metadata is the Interface, which I think is a great title. So the study finds a couple of things. The first one is kind of a foreground, kind of a meta point, which is an acknowledgement that you can't really do anything if you don't have the data to support what you want to do. So that's where the title comes from. The metadata is the interface. Your data is really what enables you to do what you want to do with an interface. And we're going to come back to that towards the end of this. Next, they found that users really don't want to have to go through the library staff, and they don't want to get help really at all. They want to work on their own to figure it out. And that might seem obvious to you, but I think it is worth mentioning because it has implications. It means that users won't read directions. It means that they won't open help screens unless they encounter or until they encounter a problem. And that they generally expect things to be really intuitive. And that is really feeds into the fact and is exacerbated by the fact that they really rely on generalized sources like Google. And I'm sure that's also not really very surprising to you, but the takeaway from this is that users use things like Google because they know it exists. It appears to be simple. It has relevance ranking, so they believe that they're getting back the most important things at the top, and it's a single jumping off point to a lot of other resources. They also found that people tended to search for subjects and named entities, so people and places. They did not search for types of content. They did not go out and look for newspapers or look for photographs. They looked for things on a topic. They also didn't look for known items or specific titles unless it was in a domain that they were already an expert in and they already knew that about. So searching titles was not something that general users do. While users want to find things about subjects, they generally use a keyword search technique. So they put in a subject term and they search all of the metadata altogether. They don't specifically search the subject headings. So that means that the results that they get back can cause confusion when subject terms show up both as a result of what something is about versus what it is. So if you think of, say, searching for an author's name, you could get back works about that author, or you could get back works by that author. And the user knows what they want, but the search engine doesn't know what they want unless they structure that query, and users don't structure queries. They assume that their searches are of comprehensive sources. So I think this quote is really scary. A student in a study at the University of Maryland, where I did my degree, said that he expected that the universe of primary sources is a finite, absolute body of material that can and has already been labeled and categorized for him. So this student assumes that everything has already been cataloged and he just needs to go and put it in the box and get back what is relevant. So there's all kinds of implications there for interfaces, but also possibly, I think, a strong indicator of what linked data can kind of help to start to do, which is to bring resources together and make them at least a little bit more comprehensive. Finally, the study found that users will scan and scroll through long lists or really text-dense resources if and only if they're motivated. So it's kind of contradictory because a lot of research says that a lot of users complain about the proverbial wall of text. But the report showed by looking at a number of these studies that actually users mostly care more about what's in the collection. So a wall of text isn't a wall when it has what you want in it. So I think in some ways this is good news. Linked data is a really good way to meet a lot of those needs. Just as some examples, linked data can aid in integration of resources from multiple sources. It helps with disambiguation. It helps with the identification of named entities. Using graph forms of relevance can really help to kind of introduce novel ways of determining relevance and maybe more interesting and useful ways. And a big part of the assumptions that that users have about things like Google and comprehensiveness has to do with relevance. They assume that what they're getting back is in some sort of relevance order. This is just a few ideas, really. The sky's the limit with what linked data could do to kind of help meet some of these information needs. And these are very basic needs. This was a meta-analysis, so this was really what you could generalize across all of them. But building interfaces that exploit these things seems to be, from my perspective, in very early stages. So I know that a lot of people in this room have built some really great interfaces. We've already seen some this morning. I'm sure we'll see some more this afternoon. But in general, I had a difficult time finding really great interfaces that met a lot of the needs that were in these studies. What I found was mostly this kind of stuff, right? Linked data. I usually use the idea, if my mom couldn't look at that and understand what it is and what's cool about it, then maybe that's not a really great interface. And I know that my mom is probably not who you're developing resources for, but my mom is a very cool lady and you probably should. But seriously, as I said earlier, I think that we really need to think about a broader set of users for our resources, because if we want them to be adopted, if we want them to be continually sustained, if we want them to continue to be supported, if we want them to build on, if we want people to learn from them, they have to be usable. So as another reason why I will advocate for this, I was recently involved in a large number of interviews with managers of digital repositories at libraries. Because we were researching what they wanted and needed in a repository tool, because we're building a new one based on the Hydra technology stack. And we asked them all how important linked data was to them. Were they really interested in having a repository that could natively deal with linked data? And no one said yes to that question. A lot of people said, oh yeah, I guess that would be cool. I've heard it does some neat stuff. But none of them had a use case for needing it. None of them had a reason for it to be important to them right now. Yeah, so I think that we need to make the case, we need to make the use case to them that it is something that they need. So just to kind of beat a dead horse here, harp on this. Oh, I forgot to advance my slides. So that was the example of the RDF. That was my mom. And so I like this quote I read in a recent issue of a publication called Library Technology Reports. I wondered why nobody was laughing. One of the key difficulties in creating linked data and making it available is in defining the use cases that make sense and will have value to the community. And this is by Eric Mitchell. And he goes on to say, publishing data in some serialization of RDF is not especially useful or interesting if it does not capitalize on links to other data sets or provide new opportunities for computational analysis of data. So I think that this gets back to the point of that's one of those use cases, that integration and interoperability of sources. So a lot of our projects at this point really offer an API, doesn't really have an intuitive search-like experience. And I will say that I don't mean to make it sound like nobody's doing their job. I think we're still in the process of creating this data. And we have to create the data before we can integrate it with other resources. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But I do want to say first that I don't want to say that there hasn't been any progress or any interesting or good interfaces developed. What I found is that there's a lot of small and subtle enhancements to traditional interfaces, and I think the best ones, those best enhancements, answer some of those needs that we talked about in the user studies. So, for example, DPLA has built two features that utilize linked data. The first of which is a map-based search and browse interface. Excuse me. So this is a look at a record for an item with some of our enhanced geographic data. The data itself is only, the enhanced data is visible only in the, I'm sorry, I haven't slept in 28 hours. So the data is only viewable in the API, but you can see that there are some geographic coordinates in there. So we take string data that's supplied by our partners and we match it against various sources, and then we enhance the records with linked data URIs and with geospatial coordinates that we get from the endpoints that we're using. And that in turn drives the map browse. So I think this is a novel kind of interface, and I believe it helps users with relevance determination. Additionally, we're also working on integrating URIs from rightstatements.org into our records. And so this will allow some more robust data to display about the right status of the material while only needing to store the URI in the record. To be honest, the work here is mainly around standardizing these statements, which is a completely different topic. But populating the records with this information creates more accurate and usable records. So those are just two small ways that DPLA is starting to integrate linked data to make small changes that make an impact. There are, of course, lots of specialized resources that have done a lot with linked data. This is from a project called Linked Jazz that creates linkages between jazz artists, all natively in RDF triples. So the seed of the project are oral history interviews with jazz musicians, and then those are mined for names, which are then matched against data sources, linked data sources like DBpedia and BOF. So it's an example of an innovative interface, but it also incorporates the multiple sources into this web. So you can see in this screenshot, the transcript is available, and it also brings in the Wikipedia sources for this artist. And it's also a great usage of the idea that users will scan and scroll if they're motivated. So this is a pretty overwhelming interface, really. But you can get the picture of it and then think that's neat and go away, or you can really explore it. It really invites exploration. It really lives comfortably with the idea that users will explore something in depth if they want to, and that's okay. One other resource that I'll talk about is a bit more fully featured. This is from NYPL Labs. They've started to build an entire digital repository based around linked data entities like agents. So this is a great way to meet that need that we talked about, that people search for resources based on named entities. So this is just an experimental demo application, but they are building some of these concepts back into their regular digital library search. So I did a search. So I did a search for Cervantes. The entry brings back lots of different types of holdings at NYPL that come from different databases, different data sets that they have. It also enriches some things like facets about the results. So there's all these interesting role terms there that come from the named entity resources, I believe from probably id.loc.gov. And then it can pull in really different types of holdings. So there weren't a lot of digitized images, but there are actually a lot of annotated music. So this is, previously you would have been searching in different repositories to find all of these different types of materials at NYPL, and it brings it all together. And you can also use it to disambiguate works by Cervantes versus works about him. If you look in the right-hand column, it's already disambiguated those two major categories of and about. And then it also links to the different sources that it brings together. So I think this is a good example of how interfaces using linked data can really be enhanced along the lines of what we know users want to do and how they search. The research also told us that users aren't necessarily coming to us first, at least, if they're coming to us at all. They're going to Google as a standard jumping off point. And this means that it's crucial that we get included into Google's knowledge graph and embedded into their results as we can and link data, specifically schema.org helps us do that. So we can't just use our own ontologies that we're familiar with and that we develop. We really have to branch out and be out there in the world and embedded with the rest of the research world. So I just wanted to end by talking about what our challenges are, and this is where I'm going to come back to that idea of first of that metadata needs to be there to support the interfaces that we want to build, and that we're still in the process of building this data. We need to create linked data in order to enhance the user experience, not just to make our own jobs easier. So we're obviously kind of at early stages with this. And our challenge is to get the data in there, and we know what we need to do. We need to embed URIs in our data. We need to reconcile and enhance our data through the use of them. We need to implement schema.org or other ontologies that are enmeshed in that web of linked data sources. And we need to create more linked data and entities when we can. So the data part is great. That sounds really straightforward. A harder part is actually building platforms that can use this and can create it. So from my own experience at DPLA, we have stumbled a bit on some of those steps. We first developed a metadata model that takes advantage of linked data. It incorporates a lot of different linked data properties, and it can be used for, there's lots of properties to hold URIs and declare whether they're exact matches or close matches or et cetera. We then started to build an ingestion system that would take source metadata in various formats and map it into RDF triples in the DPLA metadata application profile, which is very, very similar to Europeana's data model. And we built that using linked data platform. I'm not a developer, so please don't grill me on this. So linked data platform using HTTP protocols to create data and store it natively as triples, more or less. We called it Heidrun, which is the name of a Norse mythological goat, and I could do a whole other presentation about why we named it that. So the problem was we had significant performance issues with this. So it took, in one test, something like 90 hours to just create 500,000 records. And we have a data set of about 15 million. So 90 hours to just create the records, and that's before we even enhanced them by going out and dereferencing URIs at other endpoints and adding back data to it. That was just not tenable for us to do it that way. So we actually decided that we're going to create records using more traditional methods. We haven't decided exactly, maybe Python. We looked at some other languages. And then we're going to create linked data at the end of the mapping process and store it there. We're not going to rely natively on LDP the whole way through the process. It's just not feasible. So I'm referring to this whole experience as a learning opportunity as opposed to like a mistake. And I'm bringing it up because I think a lot of us are still in this stage. Again, from that same library technology reports, Mitchell says, LAM institutions that seek to deploy linked data applications are often exploring technical platforms, making localized decisions about the best systems to select. Systems don't need to be identical. In fact, it's advantageous for them not to be identical, but the fact that LAM institutions are still having to select triple stores, Sparkle engines, indexing platforms, and other services means that there is still a relatively high bar for institutions to cross in taking up linked data projects. So as a community, we're still working on the landscape, and we have to acknowledge that because we have to be flexible and willing to change course when we need to. So my take on the challenge ahead for making linked data actually work for users is to first invest in creating good data. And then we need to be adaptable because the building blocks of the technologies are going to change. We also need to keep users in mind when we're determining our priorities, and we need to create and publish those use cases because we need them in order to build good services and to justify the expense and the work of those learning opportunities that we are going to have. And finally, I think We need to make subtle changes where we can, maybe bigger changes too. But we need to stop thinking of it as an all or nothing thing. We have to completely redesign this data to totally use linked data in every part of it and make it, fabulous, and start to do little things that actually have a broad impact. So that way, the way that you do that is to test and create prototypes that don't have to be all or nothing solutions. So that's it for what I had to say. And I don't know, are we going to take any questions now, any discussion now, or wait, if anybody has anything? Thank you.
I think we have time for 2 questions. Anybody have any questions? I guess I was thinking, it's something that we talked about. No, you're not getting away so easily. It's something we were talking about over lunch when I was kind of moaning about, I guess when I was doing my PhD, it always seemed to me that librarians were the gatekeepers of books. Yes. And they were the perfect library for them was books on the shelves untouched by those creatures called scholars, getting grubby fingerprints over them. And God forbid if any of those scholars were to annotate, or scribble in the margins. So I guess there's an opportunity here in the digital world for librarians to take a rather different approach. And I guess, and this is getting back to the question about users, to what extent are you also working with researchers or lecturers or students to improve your resources? So I guess I'm turning the question back onto you.
Sure. I think that librarians are very interested in building services that users want to use. I think you're right. There's a tradition of needing to be caretakers of physical resources, and so when you have a very expensive book, you don't want people writing in it, right? That sounds legitimate, but I think that the field has definitely opened its eyes to the opportunities with technology in particular to create things that are more useful and more usable. Because really the valuable part of a book is the information in it, not the paper it's printed on. I mean, unless you're into the history of the book and book arts, in which case it's totally the paper that it's printed on. But I think that the field is really coming around to that and is really interested in that. And I think it's because librarians recognize that, we are first and foremost people who are drawn to this field because we want to provide a service. And we recognize that we can't provide that service if we don't know what you need. And I do think that there is a change in the field, and I think that technology is actually, in some ways, driving it, but in some ways, kind of like, the fertilizer that's helping it grow. Like, I think it's something that librarians have always been kind of interested in, and technology makes it more possible. So I think if you go to any, university, is where I've worked at a lot, but also in public libraries as well. I think you'll find a lot of really interesting programs and services that professionals are trying to develop to get people in and get them using the resources and using them as resources in new and different ways. They do fantastic things in public libraries with like maker spaces and innovation labs and things like that. And obviously a lot of you have experience I hope you have experiences at your academic libraries in, jointly funded digital humanities labs and things like that. That was a really long answer. I don't know if it really answered anything, but...
No, it's very helpful. And in fact, I think it's absolutely invaluable that you're here talking to us. And I think that kind of conversation, so also having academics attending library conferences, for example, would be invaluable. I will say, I don't mean to make it sound like we're all saints. A lot of librarians could probably be pushed a little bit more to get outside of their shell, but I would also encourage researchers and academics to invite librarians in. Go ahead. I think Rob has a question for you.
I do have a quick question. I assume the survey you were citing
Hydrogen Box, yeah.
So to what extent do you think that is based on the responders having essentially PDF data sets where it's just here is this paper that someone has given me to look after, rather than actually having data to look after?
I don't know that I think that may be some of them. Some of the, so the research, the interviews I was referring to were part of this Hydra in a Box project. We're developing a repository that is intended for kind of smaller scale institutions. But the interviews that we did were not strictly, were really actually pretty wide ranging, small to medium to large institutions. So a lot of them were already dealing with institutional repositories, which is like librarian slang for the places that PowerPoints and data sets go to die, right? Just the storage silo for them. I think that some of it is probably because the library doesn't see the need for it now because no one is pounding down the door asking for it. But I also really think that they don't, it's not just that they don't have the data, it's that no one's shown them how it could improve, how it could answer the challenges that they have, how it could improve the things that they do. And I think there are a lot of ways that it could. And I think that we've spent a lot of time talking about how to create RDF, and we haven't spent a lot of time talking about how that will result in a better experience for our constituents. That's my 2 cents.
I think that's great. I think we have to let you go now. So if everyone can join me to thank again Gretchen for such an interesting talk.